I'm gonna be giving the talk this afternoon or this evening, whatever it is for you. And I'm so lucky that I get to present a talk about my friend Laura Burgess's really remarkable book on Zen, the Zen way of recovery. And I know many of you have already read it, but if you haven't, I highly recommend it, especially if you happen to be in recovery. But if you're not, you're probably in recovery from something. I know that I'm in recovery from television, and I looked at myself today. I was baking and I was covered with powdered sugar, and I said, "Well, you look like you're addicted to something," And so I think it might be sugar. So, and then what I'm going to do is concentrate on chapter 14 in Laura's book, and it's entitled "Erroneous Imaginations," and the chapter actually begins with a quote that is from a chant that we chant at San Francisco Zen Center and other places. It's called the Jewel Mirror Samadhi, and it's this cherished text is attributed to Tozan Ryokai, and he lived from 807 to 869. And the quote reads, when erroneous imaginations cease, the acquiescent mind realizes itself. I'll repeat it again. When erroneous imaginations cease, the acquiescent mind realizes itself. And essentially, it speaks to the idea that by shutting our delusions and fantasies about life, we open ourselves to this vast and spacious awareness that's often obscured by ingrained feelings of separateness and alienation. And I think this Zen wisdom is as pertinent today as it was in the 800s. And as individuals who are on the path from addiction, we often experience a profound sense of separateness and alienation, which Laura aptly describes as self-created suffering. And the suffering manifests itself through broken relationships and feelings of isolation and depression and anxiety, among other challenges. And it's only by understanding our reality and recognizing our role in creating our own distress that we can touch our inherent Buddha nature or big mind. To achieve this clarity, I recommend a dedicated practice of recovery and meditation over time. And have you ever pondered the possibility of controlling your addiction? Many of us find that such thoughts have led us into cycles of chaos and despair, impacting not only our own lives, but also those of our loved ones. After 4 years of sobriety, someone once told me, "You're not an alcoholic. Why not just have one beer with me?" Well, eager to impress this person, and having drifted away from my meetings, I agreed without hesitation. I even reached out to my sponsor, confidently stating that I was no longer an alcoholic, and thank you very much for your service. And, this misguided thought, it spiraled me back into alcohol and drug use, much worse than it was before, and pushing me to the brink where I nearly lost my life. And I found myself trapped in this cycle of profound demoralization not understanding why I was being plagued by broken relationships, financial fears, or this overwhelming feeling of self-loathing. And, in such moments, we can lose sight of potential solutions, being consumed by a distorted sense of self. Living in fear, it constricts our ability to see a broader range of possibilities. I may have thoughts such as, I am inherently flawed and unlovable. Being able to recognize that I created this thought and applied it to a self that doesn't exist liberates me from grief, from its grip, freeing me from behaviors driven by my imagination. Erroneous thoughts, often referred to in recovery circles as stinking thinking, deserve our careful attention and reflection. It's helpful to explore the roots of these delusions. What experiences and influences led us to believe that we're inherently flawed or unlovable? Conversely, what circumstances make us believe that we're right and the world itself is at fault? Understanding these delusions can help us navigate the complexities of our journey with greater clarity and compassion. Many of the ways we encountered misguided thoughts in our lives tend to be quite subtle. It's not unusual for us to find ourselves wrapped in misconceptions a lot of the time. And I don't know, have you ever woken up and immediately thought about everything you have to tackle in that day or the potential problems that might arise? Or do you plan for potential catastrophes and worry about what other people think or delusions that you might have dreamed up? And when I do this, I find I'm missing out on that moment, which is usually a place of serenity, this just right now. Or perhaps you finished a meal and you can't recall what you ate. This might seem like forgetfulness, but it happens to many of us. And there are moments in conversation where instead of fully engaging, we're busy planning our responses in our minds, missing out on the chance for meaningful connection with the other person. Often we find ourselves missing the richness of life while lost in our own thoughts. Laura discusses a common misconception many of us have, the feeling of being alone. And she says, as if we're adrift in our own little boats. We tend to overlook the truth that we are all interconnected. Norman Fisher highlights that our sense of separateness, vulnerability, and alienation is not just shaped by society, but also deeply embedded in our minds, in our perceptions, and in our language. This foundational misunderstanding is a source of confusion and suffering. From a young age, we're conditioned to feel separate, and this belief continues throughout our lives, often complicating our experiences. During my own battles with addiction, my world shrank significantly. I found myself isolating, drinking, and using substances alone. I was not the life of the party, but rather retreating into my own solitude. The weight of depression and anxiety held me back from reaching out, while the illusion that I could somehow regain control perpetuated my sense of powerlessness. Many of us find ourselves ensnared by fears, allowing anxiety to take hold as we imagine dreadful scenarios that never come to pass. Laura highlights 5 key fears found in Buddhist teachings. Fear of losing our livelihood, fear of losing our reputation, fear of experiencing unusual states of mind, fear of speaking before a group. And Laura's, one of the fears that Laura brings up that I would think is my favorite is the fear of being stuck somewhere without a good book to read.
Mhm.
These are all aspects of our mental landscape that we have the power to change by engaging in recovery and diligently working through steps alongside a consistent meditation practice. We can discover the essential piece of our minds. As is often noted in 12-step programs, we can achieve a profound sense of freedom and a newfound happiness. In his poem, Faith in Mind, Saint-Saëns expresses a timeless truth, quote, "When the deep meanings of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed in vain." So it says, "The way is perfect, like vast space where nothing is lacking and nothing is in excess," end quote. He also reassures us that the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. Living without excessive preferences and attachments creates space for compassion and wisdom, allowing us to serve others with our whole heart. Many of us turn to substances like alcohol, drugs, food, gambling, sex, and on and on and on, in search of relief from suffering, hoping for a shift in our mental state. Clinging to these addictions, we often find ourselves fearful of letting go. As noted in AA's How It Works, some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. What tools do we have at our disposal in Buddhist practice and recovery to escape the traps of delusion and misguided imagination? We can turn to step work and meditation. These practices facilitate a deeper self-exploration, revealing areas where we might grow. As Suzuki Roshi wisely said, each of us is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. Through the steps, we begin to realize our role in the chaos born from our addictions, fostering humility along the way. In the 6th and 7th step, we come to terms with our shortcomings, while the 10th step encourages a daily inventory of ourselves. Both the steps and meditation lead us gently back to our original selves through persistence. In our sobriety, we have the opportunity to become more present and aware in our lives than many of us have ever been before. We can finally turn our attention to our fears, allowing ourselves to sit with them and actually befriend them. Laura shared the beautiful story told by the Buddha of a man who is running across a field being chased by a tiger. Holding onto a vine, he swings himself over the edge of the cliff and sees another tiger down below, licking its chops and waiting for him. Just then, a white mouse and a black mouse crawl out of a hole and start nibbling at the vine. He looks over and sees a strawberry growing close by. He grasps it, and how sweet it tastes. And this is really a metaphor for life. Fearful, tenuous, fraught with difficulty and suffering, ultimately fatal, and also so sweet. I put a little of this in practice a few weeks ago when my son was undergoing heart surgery. I have deep fears around the health of my son formed by the causes and conditions in my own life. I was feeling relatively calm until he went into surgery, and then I found myself sitting in the cardiac waiting room, shaking and tapping my feet and trying to distract myself from my fears by taking the inventory of all the other people in the room. And I was pretty convinced that my suffering far outweighed anything they were experiencing. So, Cynthia, erroneous imagination strikes again. I had a moment of clarity and was able to use the pause button that I learned about in recovery and decided to stop moving and thinking about everything but my fear. It took a few minutes of deep breathing, but I was able to calm myself, and I found a meditation room where I sat zazen, sitting with my fears and letting them pass over and over until they've mostly dissipated. The surgery was long but successful, and I'm so grateful for the tools that get me through these moments of intense suffering. I'm grateful for my son's life and the miracle of being born a human. Laura mentions that the antidote to erroneous imaginations and our paralyzing fear is to remember the preciousness of having been born a human being and to understand impermanence. Having gone through similar life-threatening situations with my son, Sam, we have become closer to each other and shared a joyful relief that is such a gift. Understanding our humanness and collective suffering allows us to slow down and savor that privilege of being alive. As Hakuin Zenji, our great Zen ancestor, said, quote, having had the good fortune not only to have been born into this world as a human being, but also to have encountered the teachings of the great Shakyamuni Buddha, how can we help but be overjoyed, end quote. At the same time, we keep in mind that the joy and gratitude that we can access is only possible by taking our practice into our daily lives. Finding satisfaction where we are is a state of mind that was elusive to me at one point. One of the slogans that I like to remind myself every day is to practice being satisfied. I have enough. I am enough. We are all interconnected, and we all have Buddha nature. Once we're able to access this appreciation for our human life, the urgency of that Zen warning, quote, awake, each one awake, don't waste this life, end quote, begins to have a true meaning for us. In our delusion or erroneous imaginations, we often drift off into our oblivions, assuming that our feelings of joy or sorrow or grief or any mental formation we are having is permanent. We are encouraged to stay awake to each precious moment, knowing that in the next moment, things will change. If we stay mindful to our breathing and to each moment that arises with the breath, we directly experience the world of our impermanence. The breath rises and falls. Our emotions like fear will rise and subside. Taking this practice off the cushion and out into our everyday lives, we can allay our own fears by reaching out to those who need us. This practice of service takes us out of our own temporary suffering, and we can directly experience connection with others who may benefit from our vulnerabilities and the wisdom of our practice. My fears of people and economic insecurity were causing me a great deal of stress, but just being stalled by fear wasn't helping my recovery. I needed to face my fears head on, paying back money I owed, learning to save for future expenses, calling another alcoholic, speaking in front of groups, being vulnerable, and allowing my experience to help others were all actions that I needed to start getting over those feelings of fear and remorse. Putting an end to blame and self-pity comes through seeing things as they really are without erroneous imagination. As we work with others, self-seeking will slip away. We will know a new freedom and a new happiness. I love the AA promises. They have taught me not to regret the past nor to wish to shut the door on it. I can use the past experience to as to share my strength and hope. And who doesn't want to comprehend serenity and peace? And the beauty of the 12-step program and our Buddhist practice is that we can develop the capacity to experience it all with equanimity and calmness of mind, made possible through the repetition of a stable meditation practice. Many of us will experience an identity shift that isn't limited by our hopes and fears, where we can situate ourselves within the experience of the moment. This requires a serious rejection of self-centeredness to experience the deeply transformative, effective practice. And I want to tell you that courage is available. If I can find it, anyone can. We aren't hermit monks living high in the Himalayas. We are everyday people out in the marketplace of life, dealing with the stresses of political upheaval, family relationships, employment challenges, mortgages, and rents. Our lives are active and juicy and full. Being humbly aware of our interdependentness and approaching life with a compassionate heart, we'll experience being satisfied. Nothing more or less is needed. And to close, I'd like to share a quote from the Dalai Lama. Every day, think as you wake up, I am fortunate to be alive. I have a precious human life. I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to use all my energies to develop myself, expand my heart out to others, to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. Thank you.
Cynthia, thank you. Shall we sit for a few minutes? Let's see. Okay, I think this bell should work. Here we go. What are we doing?